Brian Bosse, CEO and Director of CUPANI Metals. With 30 years in commodities and public equity experience, Brian has a strong track record in corporate restructuring and value creation. I'm going to be quiet now, though, and I'll let Brian start his 15 minutes.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I've set a timer for 15 minutes. I want to respect the audience's time and then all the other presenters behind me. And this speed dating over lunch hour actually is a really good idea, Kyle. So thanks for coming up with this. The company is called CUPANI. Last night I gave a dinner presentation, ran about 40 minutes and had 40 slides. For this, I've done a lot of cutting, and so the deck you're going to see here is a shorter one. But I think we've kept all the exploration excitement in the deck. So where are we? Well, first of all, what are we looking for? Copper, nickel. There's also platinum and palladium in it, and there's a historical tonnage drilled off in the 1980s with just under 5 million tons of 2.2% copper equivalent. That copper equivalent is made up, it's basically all just under half copper, the other half is nickel, and then the platinum palladium comes up for the rest. So where are we? We're in Quebec. We are in northern Quebec. The nearest town is called Schefferville. Schefferville was built in the 1950s by the Iron Ore Company of Canada. There are open pits up there running to this day, and there's a rail line from Schefferville down to a Atlantic cargo port at Sept-Îles. There's also a hydroelectric dam just south of Schefferville, and that'll come up again later because it could be a really good source of cheap power. It was overbuilt for its needs, and it needs customers now. Anyway, before we move on, I'll say that Quebec is a great jurisdiction. We really like working in Quebec. And let's move to the next slide. Okay, so this is an image of northern Quebec and also some parts of Labrador. This is not our image. We took this from a government report published jointly by the Geology Services of Quebec, Newfoundland, and the federal government. And what they did to create this map, and they released this in 2015, was they did about 38,000 samples of lake beds and riverbeds all over the north. And then they took that data they took that sampling to the lab and created a heat map of where is there copper, and they did another map for nickel. It looks very much the same. Where is there copper in the watershed? Of course, the key for exploration is if you find copper in the lakes and rivers, you have to ask yourself where it came from. And so the large red blob you see in the center of the screen where the copper is the hottest, that's us. And once we saw this government report, we ran over to the Quebec database, and if we go to the next slide, you'll see we've taken the raw data from that government report and we've mapped it onto the Quebec staking database called GESTEM. And we asked our software to show us everything where the copper in the watershed is greater than 200 parts per million, and then we staked everything in that envelope that was open for staking. So we have a huge land package. It's very deliberate. We're a very small company, so there's a huge amount of exploration upside to the stock price here. And we have over 500 square kilometers. And now on this map here, you can see the background, the grid, that's our staked claims. You can also see the isobars of copper in the watershed. And if you zoom in a little bit, or if you look hard in the center of the screen, you'll see there is a red rectangular box that's a little bit tilted down this way. That rectangular box represents the geographic space at surface for the nearly 5 million tons of 2.2% copper equivalent that was drilled off in the 1980s. But as you can see, that spot is not even the hottest spot for copper in the region, nor is it the only spot. There's at least 5 other, maybe 7, depending on how you do it, really good indications that there's a source of copper somewhere that is leaching into the water. And that is why we wanted to lock up the whole darn thing. We didn't want to focus on one and then discover that we missed something else that's great. So this is an immense project. We're a small company, and we're going to get a lot out of this. Now, I'll take a moment here before we go to our next slide and talk about who we are. Our head of geology is a gentleman named Douglas McQuarrie. If you're a regular Six follower, you'll probably be familiar with his prior company, Asante Gold. Douglas started Asante from nothing. It is now 3 operating gold mines in the country of Ghana. He is retired from Asante, and he is now working on this. In fact, he likes it so much, he bought just about 20% of the company. And if you think that's good, I own 30%. So between management, Douglas is on the board. So between the board members, we have about 55% of the shares. We paid for them with cash. My own cost is 6 cents a share. Douglas's is probably 7 or 8 cents a share. Friends and family of ours, people who've made money with us in our past stories, are also big shareholders. We have 117 million shares out, but as I like to say, we can have our AGM in a minivan because it's very, very, very tightly held. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I see we have 8 minutes left, so I'll have to speed up. Exploration is never easy. How are we going to find more of this tonnage? The rock that we're looking for, and we already know the type of rock we're looking for because, like I said, it was drilled off in the 80s. It's magnetic. There's a high and a low conductivity for when it's disseminated and when it's not. It's heavier than the surrounding rock. And so far, everywhere that there is a surface sample, there is something underneath. And that is because this area was very heavily glaciated for a long time. 10,000 years ago, there were glaciers left. And the surface rock has been weathered away, which of course fits with what you see. How are you getting the copper and nickel into this lake beds and streams? It's because it's coming from what is now surface rock. So everywhere we've been, and even above the historical tonnage is 2.2% copper equivalent. But if you pick up a rock at surface, that's about 1. So it's about half. And so we keep looking for surface samples, and we have an immense amount of surface samples. Next slide, please. All right, this image is from an adit that was driven into the historical tonnage in 1987. And the company that did this was focused on platinum and palladium. In the 1980s, precious metals were a very, very big thing. So they drove a 350-meter adit into one of the large pods that constitutes the 5 million tons. They got all the heavy equipment in. They took it by rail up to Shefferville, and then they drove out across an ice road to reach where we are here in the photo. And they pulled out all their tonnages. They mapped the grades, piled them up, and marked them. And so you can see there's probably, I'll call it 22 tons of material here, which we have then sampled again when we started to work really hard on this project in 2024 after spending 10 years consolidating it. There's some great samples on there. The best piece of rock we pulled just by walking through that area was 7% copper. Obviously, that's not representative, but there's a lot to be found here. We're very excited. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so that image I just showed you, again, part of the historical tonnage. And on this map, the historical tonnages are within the hand-drawn shapes that you see in the middle of the screen, and they each have a name. So there's Blue Lake 1 all the way through to Blue Lake 6, and on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a hand-drawn area called Center 1 and Center 2, and there's something called Pogo. So those are the delineations as known in the 1980s. And then what we're showing you underneath and around is gravimetric high responses. This is where there's heavier mass underneath the earth than anyone knows how to explain. And the expectation is, and we have to prove this by drilling, that heavier mass is caused by the copper and the nickel. So 5 million tons is a nice start. That's what we have historically. But as you can see here, there could be many multiples of 5 million tons to be had here. And we have a huge amount of land. I'm only showing you one of our 5 zones. And we're going to be doing gravity over a lot of places, magnetic response over a lot of places. Next slide, please. All right, here's another one of those places. What I'm showing you now is 10 miles away from what I just showed you. This is an area that was flown by Anglo-American for electromagnetic responses in the year 2013 when they had this project. And they found a lot of magnetic responses, but they never bothered to go check it out in person. And nobody went there until we sent a crew in September of 2024. And we have found that 9 kilometers long so far, continuous mineralization at surface of copper, nickel, and the surface grades we're getting are about 1%, which leads us to hope that there's 2 or change or something underneath. It's never been drilled, and it's going to be a priority target for us in 2025. And for those gold fans in the room, there is an unexpected just under 2 grams per ton at surface. So we're going to definitely follow how that got there. Next slide, please. All right, this is a photo of what I've just shown you on that map, that large U shape. And I've shown this photo to demonstrate a couple things. One, it's a hilltop, which means if we ever get to mining it, it's really good. You don't have to do a overburden or a pit to get to the good stuff. Second, the mineralization is under 1 foot of soil. And in this image, we're looking at one end of a 40-foot long trench that is going off into the distance here of the photo. And you can also see a white sled-looking thing to the edge of this trench, and that is a beep mat, and that's how we've mapped out the 9 kilometers so far. We expect it's actually a lot longer than 9 kilometers, but the beep map can only go down through about 10 feet of soil. So once the soil gets a little deeper than that, we just stop counting, and we'll go back and trench or something this year. Next slide, please. Here's another image from that same spot, and the key takeaway here is there's about 2 feet of soil there. And underneath that is our 1% copper hand sample. And we believe that beneath that rock, we're hoping to find 2%, 2 and change. And it's 10 kilometers long. It's 15 meters wide at surface. And the great question is, how deep is it? We'll find out. Next slide. All right. This is what we have in the bag so far. This is how we make up the nearly 5 million tons of 2.28% copper equivalent. And that's how we know, quote, the land is pregnant. We're just looking for the baby, and we're hoping it's triplets. Next slide, please. Okay, it's never too early. It's never too early to consider the business model. I mean, finding something is fantastic, but if you find it somewhere that it's too expensive to build, you're not really doing a service for shareholders. So the next couple of slides are going to touch on that. So open pit's been happening in this region since the 1950s. Local infrastructure is excellent. The Iron Ore Company of Canada in the 1950s built a hydroelectric dam with 4 turbine slots in it. They only ever installed 3 turbines. That dam is now owned by the Newfoundland Hydro Corporation. They bought it for $1. They have no customers except the people who live in Shefferville. That dam is not connected to the Quebec provincial grid, nor is it connected to the Labrador-Newfoundland grid. So they're looking for customers, and we want to be one. We think we'll get cheap power there. Next slide.
Just final minute, Brian.
Okay, next slide. Okay, this is even better. This is a map of average wind speeds in Quebec. The reason why this is in here is because the 2025 exploration camp will be wind powered, and the winds are so strong there and so consistent. There's a possibility, this is a calculation for some later year, but you'll be able to run a mining operation on a wind power farm with battery backup and then natural gas generators behind that, again, which would really improve the economics. If you're interested in this, give me a call. There's my phone number. We've got lots of documents up on the public databases. and there's my email. My timer just went off.
Perfect. Excellent timing. Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate it. We'll relay anyone that's interested. Feel free to mention in the chat, but thank you so much for your time, Brian.
Okay. Bye-bye.